Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. This is part 46 in the Crunchy Cobra Jet / Slither series. Now in the last video I was working on the hood for this car. I had cut the hole in it and I can tell you that I had a problem with that. Once I cut the hole, that wasn't the issue. It was the fact that I did not have proper safety glass protection or face protection, and I ended up with a piece of metal stuck in my eye, which kind of took me out for about a week or so trying to recover from that. Since that time I also went on vacation, and now I'm back working on the Cobra Jet. Okay, so again, the last video was working on the hood. Now this video, this car is on the ground. So I show a brief clip here of letting the car off, or taking the car off of the lift, and I'm so happy to have this car on the ground. It rolls pretty easy, and I'm ready to start doing the fitment of the fenders and the hood and the doors, all that stuff. I had already done that previously in another video when it was on my frame jig that I had made. And I don't like to final fit everything until the car is on the ground itself, because that gives you a true look at how it's going to sit and whether there's any problems with how the body is, sitting on the suspension. So I'm going to cover some ground in this video. I'm going to show you some things, and we'll see how far I can get in the process. So you already have seen the bulk of this car and what I've done to it, of course, and building it up from pieces and parts of the original car. With that, I have the original door hinges, which are not in the best of condition. There are some problems with these. They're very heavily pitted, and the wear area on the little spring tensioner is pretty bad, especially on this one. You can see just how worn it is and how thin it is. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to use these hinges as they are. I do have a backup set of hinges that I may test fit with those, and if those work, I'm just planning to use those rather than fight with these. The other hinges, they also have some heavy pitting on them. I may weld that up. I know Charles had suggested that previously. On these, it's not a big deal to weld because it's a, good solid metal, and it's part of the original car, so maybe keep those. And the actual hinge point is in great condition. These, again, I don't know. I'm just really concerned with the spring device, and I did have trouble with the passenger door previously trying to get it to close with I think it was that one. It had a bunch of problems. All right, so I have these doors. These are the Dynacorn doors. I've already test fitted those. I do know that there is a problem on this driver's door. That's this one, where they didn't get the stamping right down here. The passenger door, the line looks really good, but this you can kind of see it's just not shaped right. This one has a nice flange. This one's a little out of shape and distorted. So I may end up, well, I know I'm going to have to weld onto this to build it up and get the shape looking much better. I'm not sure what really happened though. It's weird because it looks like that was hammered down or something, and they just I don't know. That almost looks like they took a hammer, like a body hammer, and kind of smashed that to kind of fatten that up a little bit, and that was not a good plan. I also have the quarter extensions. Of course, this is the original paint from those. I will need to blast these and make them, ready for paint, so I have to take care of that. Along with that, I have over here, I have the deck lid that I'm going to put on the car, and back here I have the hinges, and these are the original hinges. Again, they need to be blasted and cleaned up, and you can see the original paint is still on these. So I have those as well. Oh yeah, here's the engine mounts. Don't need those at this moment, but I have them. On the other side of the car, I have, well, these pieces. These are the actual original mount points for the deck lid hinges, and I always put the hardware back into these, the bolts holes if I can. So that's why I still have these pieces. So I do have all the bolts for that. Up here we have the original fenders. Now I also have other fenders, and I'm on the fence as to what I'm going to do exactly. I would love to use as much of the original car as I could. These fenders, the front sections, everything is really, it's solid, it's pitted, but it's very solid. and in great shape. The problem is the lower section here. So I've done repair work on these fenders before. I tried to find patch panels for these, but apparently they don't sell those patch panels. So I may end up taking some aftermarket fender and cutting that piece out just to keep that fender on the car. And that's the driver's side fender. Now, the other problem, the passenger side fender, it's more pitted than the driver's side, which isn't necessarily going to affect it too much, but it also has that area again on the bottom, and it has a big dent right here above where the front wheel would go. So I'm not committed to this one just yet. I may try to save it, but I haven't decided. Along with that, I have these Dynacorn hood hinges that we're going to use. These are their upgraded version, I guess, premium quality. As you can see there, I do recommend these hinges. They move very nice and freely, so that's what I put on Jade. And the other thing I need to address is these tabs. Basically, they go right about here. And I can show you on the original car that I have. I'm going to have to just do a measurement from either from this flange maybe to this location, but basically that's where they go. You can see this has a taper on it, and that's because this tapers in, and so maybe looking at it that way you can see the taper. So that's going to end up there. Not a big deal. That I can put the fender on and set this up in place to make sure it's in, it's close. And even if it's not, you can bend this back and forth a little bit if need be to get it in the right position. So with all that said, I'm not sure exactly where I'm going to start. Probably with hanging the doors and go from there. Alright, I have the door on and I'm running into some of the similar problems that I had before. So in the rear, this gap is really nice. Can't complain about that. Seems to line up pretty close on top. I don't like this corner just because I'm kind of anal about this. This feels too much like a corner where this is kind of rounded off. So I may have to grind that a little and reshape it. I don't like the transition there. Pretty minor. Come to the front section, and I knew I had problems with this door before, and it's not changing in the couple months since I've worked on it. Now, if I push this in, the fender, it lines up pretty close. The fender sticks out just a little past the door, which isn't that big of a concern. The bigger concern is up here. That is pretty substantial. Now, I've already taken the door in some. The problem is when you push the door in, you also bring in the midsection. So something's got to give. You either have to compensate in the middle or compensate at the top, or a combination of both. So let me show you what I found with the contour gauge, and I demonstrated this before. So this is on the fender, and you can see I have all the rods making contact. If I come way back here on the door, it's pretty close. Pretty close. I come forward, still pretty decent, but I get up here and now I've got a gap up at the top and a slight gap at the bottom, and it's really bad all the way to the front. So I know I'd already planned on kind of massaging this door. You can maybe see this has this nice dip here, and then it almost gets flat right there. So I might put the other fender on just to see if it's any better, but odds are I'm going to be taking something and bashing that in to try to get this curve to where it should be. That's the worst part of the door at this point. So I've got to fix that. So I'm going to put the other fender on, and we'll take another look at it. Okay, this fender is closer. Still not 100%, but it's closer. The gap is decent. Little high here in the middle, pushes out from the center of the door. But I think the door also kind of flattens in this location. Like, you know, there's a curve, but it feels less pronounced here than it does on this fender. And this is an original fender. So if you come up to the top, the gap is better, but that's with the fender sticking out. So if I push it in, I have that same situation right there. I did not, let me check the gauge, see what it says. So original fender, yeah, same situation, only this one seems to fit better at the top. So I think I'm gonna just knock this in and see if I can't get closer on this transition to make that look right. I did take a 2x4 and put against this and smacked it to try to get the shape to flatten a little bit, but I may have to work this part of the door out slightly. And you know, it's just one of those things. You gotta do what you gotta do. I know I have a few little dents right here. This structure was pretty strong, and that's the only way I could figure, you know, was to do some heavy impact to try and reshape that. And so it's much closer to where it needs to be. If it takes a little filler, that's fine. I mean, it's going to take filler regardless. Anytime you do these seams, you're going to have a wash of filler all the way across to make things right. As you also saw, I took the board and put on the edge of this fender, knocked it in, but the curve is still there. I'm going to have to take the door back off and work this forward flange out a little bit. But overall, if I push the fender in to where it's supposed to be, it's pretty close at this point. The door does open. It rubs just a little. So there is a lot of primer and stuff on here. I'm going to clean some of this off. I may end up grinding down some of this front edge just to make sure it clears, because once you get paint on both sides, it's going to want to hit. So it's a start. It's going to take a while, but I'm pretty happy with what I have so far. Okay, I've removed the fender once again, and I've noticed that the bottom edge of the door, I don't know how well the light will show this, it may be too bright, it's actually pretty much touching the rocker panel right there. But as I go further back, it has a nice gap. So I feel like this bottom edge here has to be adjusted. I can't raise the door up because it'll put it too high in relation to the fender, and the body line is where it needs to be. So what I'll probably end up doing is splitting open or cutting off part of that flange to raise it up slightly. This, you know, you can't do much with these aftermarket doors if they're not perfect, and we know the originals are the best way to go, but sometimes you have to make modifications. So I'll probably cut along that bottom edge and rebuild that, or raise it up slightly so that the gap is good. As you open a door and close it, you know, it'll rub on that, and that'll cause serious problems later when it comes to paint. So I'm gonna have to adjust that, or address that as well. Up here, same thing we talked about. You know, I showed you this. I'll do more work on this to make the transition better, but to get the main part to move was the main concern. Also, I'm going to strip off probably all that primer, because I don't know what's on that, and I'm obviously not going to use that. And I need to weld up the little holes where it said Mustang at some point. Obviously the Cobra Jet didn't have that, based on, you know, that fender and the striping. So those will have to be welded shut, and I'll just have to clean up that fender and make sure everything's going to work out the way it should. So I got some things to do right now. Okay, I was not expecting that. So there are some dents here, which is okay, because I would rather have some dents that I can deal with as opposed to rust. But there was a lot of filler here. You can maybe see that dips in a lot more than it should. There's also a few dings up here. I don't know if they worked it and knocked those, you know, put those little dimples. And then this right here, that changes the transition. So like that body line is pushed up, so I need to get that back and out. The thing is, there's no access from the back, so I'm gonna have to put a little couple things. I may put my stud welder on here and just pop that out a little and tap down here at the top. The other alternative would be to put a slice, a cut right there, and work that piece back, and then tap this down and weld it back together. Hopefully that's the worst of it. We'll see, but I was kind of surprised to see that much filler in this, even though it is a solid fender. You know, that's the plus on that. So yeah, I'm covered in Bondo dust. Okay, keep moving on. Alright, so I put the fender back on the car, and I knew where it was located. Basically, I have witness marks from where the bolts held it in place. So I have it in the most forward position, and all I'm going to do is take the little bracket, and I'll come up underneath, set it in place, bolt it to the fender so that it's fitting the way it should. Once I have that in place, I can weld this little corner right here, and that'll hold it until I take the fender back off, and then I can weld the top part. I did some measuring on the original car, and I'll show you that as well, just to give you some perspective. So we're again back in the pile of parts and my Mach 1. So come back here, and this passenger side, you can see where it's located. It's just behind the top of the cowl piece, and if I measure from this flange, essentially we're at 4 1/4 from the back side of this flange. Now if I go to the other side, I have to get my way through the pile of sheet metal here. I can do the same thing, come in, measure, and roughly 4 1/4. And you can also see this isn't sitting completely flush. It's angled slightly. There's a gap underneath this front section where they had welded it. Not that critical because this is a big opening, plenty of room for a bolt. But just know even from the factory these weren't put on super precise. So to weld this, I'm going to use my Arc Captain MIG 200, and I have 30 thousandths wire in it. So I have a synchronous function. You turn that off. Verify I'm on CO2 mix, argon CO2 mix. I can change that. I can also change my wire thickness. So there's 0.6, 0.8, which I believe is the correct, as close you're going to get for 30 thousandths. You can change your voltage input, your amperage input, or you can put it on synchronous, and then you can determine how thick your metal is. And I believe it's this one. So you can turn that up or down based on how thick the piece of metal is you're welding. So I'm going to use this and weld that plate in. I know it's kind of hard to see in here with what I'm doing, but I'm going to get this up in place. Put a bolt in. Try to get that as centered as I can on the existing hole, or the bolt I should say. That should work. Ta-da! Now, of course, as I mentioned with the car in the back, there is a gap right there. But this hole is centered on the bolt, and that's my concern. As they like to say, that's not going anywhere. Okay, moving on to the door. Now, I pointed out in a previous video that there was a problem right here with this door as it was stamped from Dynacorn, and I think I showed it earlier in this video. Now, what I did is I laid a piece of tape to mimic roughly the gap that I want to have at the bottom of this door. Now, what's interesting to me is, I'm going to show you in just a second, if I take this straight edge and if I were to go on the bottom of the door, then this gap gets really big right here in the middle. I don't know how well you can see that, but it gets really big. That is not where the problem is. The problem is up here. This is fat. So if I put this on, come up from the bottom, and I'm touching the whole edge of the door, look at this now. You should be able to see my tape line basically lines up with the bottom edge of the door where it should be. So this section at the minimum is too low, and I'll show you that by flipping over the door. Alright, so I hope you can see what I'm talking about. This is kind of a lump actually, and you see where this was like misstamped. Like this whole line is really nice. Well, from way back here, this is an even shape until you get right about here. And then it looks like somebody hammered this thing and tried to reshape it. Almost like they knew the material was going to be short, or what they thought was short, right here. And so they kind of bashed it to make it fatten up and fill in that gap. However, again, if I put this on, that gap gets really bad, but if I can go on top like that and follow the actual line of the door, And you can see it's going to line up with my tape. If I go on the bottom side, there is excess material, and you can see right here where the bottom, there's the little gap of the door. So that whole thing needs to be up higher. So I'm going to have to do something. I may end up having to take a Ziz wheel. I think I might have to go to the outside and cut this along the edge pretty far back, because you don't want to do it a short section and then end up having an obvious transition. So I'm going to have to go way back, way back. Let me see if I can get the camera back far enough. I may end up cutting all the way back into what would be a good area, just to make sure when I move this piece, it's not a short adjustment. In other words, if I cut it here and bring this up, now you'll have a point. The further back you go, the less of an angle it is. Make sense? Hope so. So I think that's what I'm going to have to do. Hopefully I don't have to remake this whole flange, because it's ugly, but it's not visible whenever you're putting the car together. And you can address some of it, but yeah, I definitely got some mods to do. I cut that loose, and you could actually see this want to spring away. This is pulled away from this. Now, granted, you could say some of that is from heat, but it's really not, because this stamping, if you look, here's that high point, right? So it runs even, then it gets really big, and then it fades away. So by cutting this, what I'm hoping to do, and I can clamp the edge back up against the bottom of the door, make it nice and snug. And further, the more I come forward, the more I can do the same and bring it up. Now, this is easy enough to tap up into place. And what I'll have to do is I may put some tack welds in this and then refit it to the car. I may also use my straight edge, which I can't get into the inside of these vice grips at the moment. There's just not enough space. Make sure you don't put so much pressure on the vice grips that you're deforming the skin. But that is going to help a ton in getting that line where it's supposed to be. I still have this little area right here underneath the vice grip where it had that dip, so I may have to weld onto that to get the shape that I want, but much better. Okay, so I've made my adjustments. Obviously moved this up. I trimmed off a little more metal up front than I did in the back so that I could move it up just a little bit more. That was my concern, was this front section. So I know it's hard to see, but if I put the straight edge back up, it's pretty much on. There's a little area right here which I had already talked about. That's where there was a lack of metal, so I'm going to have to weld onto that. But at this point, I'm going to have to put this back on the car and have a look at it and see if I got close enough. We'll find out. So the door is back on where it belongs. Gap is decent. Come to the front, and again, gap is really good now. The overlap, or where it's going to stick out, let's say, is minimal at this point. I'm really close on that. And now that I've trimmed up the bottom edge, it is much, much closer to where it should be. Still a little bit of tuning, just a little, but I'm very happy with how that looks. So I'll continue on with this. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about how that looks. Obviously I'll have to take care of these dents and stuff in the fender, but that's kind of minor at this point. I have to look at a couple spots on where I'm at here. I may have to take this up just a little bit more. Now that I look at it with the light, it's pretty close, but still, you get the idea of what I'm trying to do here. Alright, I did another cut and some more welding, and I really like the way this looks now. So I don't know if the light can show it well enough, but I now have a very good gap all the way back. Very consistent. Body lines line up on the door like it should, and we already know how the fender fits. So there's still a lot more to do. However, this was the problem door overall. I know that the passenger door seemed to be a better fit, and I was concerned with some of the things here. There's still some massaging, as I mentioned before, in this area here I'll play with, but much happier with how that fits right now. And again, I'll have to do some work on that fender. So I didn't get as far as I wanted. That's typically the case. You start getting into something, and like the fender, I didn't realize it had a bunch of Bondo in it, so I had to strip that off. Adjustments had to be made to the door, of course, reshaping it. I already knew that was going to be a problem, and it is what it is. I will continue to work on this car, continue to make videos, and hopefully you found some useful information in this video itself. Now, I do encourage you to join Patreon. I've mentioned it many times. My revenue continues to go downhill, and there's nothing I can do about it. So the support I get from my patrons is what keeps me going and making these videos. I really do like to share this stuff, but I also like to make it worth my while, and that's the reality of anything these days. So if you would, look at the Patreon. There's a link in the description below. There's also a link for the Evolution chop saws that I've used, a link for the Arc Captain welder, and anything else that I may have used making these videos. So again, thanks for being here, and until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya.